Let me ask you something. If the person you trusted most in this world, the one who slept beside you every night, the one who held your hand at funerals and made you laugh on your worst days, if that person looked you dead in the eyes one evening and said something so cold, so calculated that your whole body went numb, would you crumble? Or would something inside you quietly, slowly start to harden? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And what came after? Nobody saw it coming. Not even me. My name is Sarah Mitchell. For 6 years, I was married to a man named Ryan. We had a life that looked beautiful from the outside. A 4-bedroom house in a quiet suburb outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of neighborhood where kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on, and your neighbor waves at you every single morning like clockwork. Ryan worked in commercial real estate. I was a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm downtown. We were the couple people pointed at dinner parties and said, "Now that's how you do it." Paper lies. Looking back, the cracks started forming about 14 months before everything fell apart. Small things at first. Ryan began taking phone calls in the garage. I'd come home after a long day and find his car in the driveway, the kitchen quiet, and him standing between the tool shelves and his old gym bag, voice low, phone pressed to his ear. The moment he'd see me, he'd hold up one finger. "Just wait." Then he'd end the call, walk in, kiss me on the cheek and say it was a client issue. And I believed him. Because that's what love does. It finds explanations for things that don't make sense. Then came the money. Small cash withdrawals from our joint account. 200 here, 300 there, always on weekdays when I was at work. When I brought it up at dinner one night, Ryan smiled that calm, easy smile of his and said he'd been paying for client lunches, parking, the usual. I nodded. I let it go. But there was something else. Something that felt stranger than the phone calls and the cash. Ryan started asking me about my past. Specifically about my first husband, a man named Daniel Cruz. Daniel and I had married young. I was 24, he was 31. We divorced 4 years later. Not out of bitterness, but out of that quiet, honest recognition that two people have sometimes grown into completely different directions. There were no kids, no screaming matches, no dramatic finale. He moved to Seattle, started a software company, and we lost touch entirely. I hadn't spoken to Daniel in over a decade. So when Ryan started mentioning him, "Whatever happened to that first guy of yours, the tech one?" I figured it was just insecurity. Harmless jealousy. He asked 3 times in 2 months. Each time disguised differently. A joke. A casual comment. A question buried inside another question. I filed it under things to eventually talk about in couples therapy and moved on. I was 8 weeks pregnant when my world collapsed. I had taken 2 home tests before confirming it with my doctor. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. Ryan and I hadn't been actively trying, but we hadn't been preventing it either. I had assumed, foolishly I now understand, that we were on the same page about wanting a family. I came home on a Tuesday evening with a small gift bag. Inside was a little onesie that read Future Engineer. Tucked beneath it in tissue paper was the ultrasound photo. I remember every second of what came next. Ryan opened the bag. He looked at the onesie. He looked at the photo. He set both down on the kitchen island with the careful, deliberate movements of someone who had already decided something long before that moment. And then he looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. Flat, cold, calculated, and said the words I will never unhear for the rest of my life. "That's not my child." I laughed. I actually laughed because my brain refused to accept it as real. But his face didn't move. He said it again. He said he knew I had been unfaithful. He said he had suspected it for months. He said he wanted me out of the house that night. When I reached for him, he stepped back like I was something he didn't want to touch. By 9 o'clock that evening, I was sitting in my car in a Walmart parking lot 2 miles away. The gift bag still on the passenger seat. Nowhere to go. No idea what had just happened to my life. Perhaps that was the moment that could have destroyed me. And for a few hours in that cold parking lot, it almost did. I sat there for a long time in the dark and asked myself one question over and over. What does a man do? A man who has been happily married for 6 years, when he finds out his wife is pregnant, and his very first reaction is absolute, unshakable certainty that the baby isn't his. That's not grief. That's not confusion. That's a conclusion someone reaches before they even open the gift bag. I didn't have the answer yet. But somewhere in the back of my mind, Something cold and quiet had already started looking for it. I slept in my car that night. Not in some dramatic movie scene kind of way. I just sat in the driver's seat with the heat running because it was February in Charlotte, and February there will fool you. Mild during the day, cold enough to ache at night. I didn't cry for a long time. I just sat. The Walmart parking lot was still open. People walked in and out with grocery bags, loading their trunks, arguing gently about which brand of cereal to buy. Normal life 15 feet away from me. Completely unreachable. By midnight I had done the accounting. I had roughly $400 in my personal checking account. Almost everything I'd saved over the past 2 years had been moved into our joint account at Ryan's suggestion. It made bill paying easier, he'd said. My laptop was inside the house. My work files. My health insurance was tied to Ryan's employer plan. I was 8 weeks pregnant with no independent insurance, no accessible savings, and no key to a door that no longer felt like mine. But then a thought arrived quietly, without fanfare. Ryan had asked about Daniel 3 times in 2 months. Ryan was not a sentimental man. He didn't do things without a reason. He was methodical, patient, strategic. 20 years in commercial real estate had trained him to identify value before other people even noticed it existed. So if Ryan had been asking about Daniel Cruz, it wasn't jealousy. It was research. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I searched Daniel's name. His company, a mid-sized software firm he'd founded in Seattle, had been acquired 3 years earlier. The acquisition price hadn't been made public, but I recognized the firm that bought it. And companies like that didn't make small acquisitions. There was a sparse LinkedIn profile, a few old business articles, and then nothing. Daniel had gone completely quiet after the sale. Deliberately quiet. I stared at my phone screen in that dark parking lot, and a cold understanding began to settle over me. What did Ryan know that I didn't? And how long had he known it? I didn't sleep much. Around 5 in the morning, I drove to a 24-hour diner and ordered coffee and eggs I barely touched. By the time the breakfast crowd started arriving, I had the skeleton of a plan. First, I needed to get back into that house to retrieve my documents. My passport, my social security card, my personal laptop, the external hard drive with all my engineering work. These things were mine. Second, I needed a lawyer. Not a divorce attorney, not yet. I needed someone who could tell me where I stood financially, what my rights were regarding the joint account, and whether Ryan could legally change the locks on a home mortgaged in both our names. Third, I needed a doctor. I was 8 weeks pregnant and currently uninsured. Fourth, and this felt both fragile and essential, I needed to find out exactly what Ryan knew about Daniel Cruz. Because if Ryan had been tracking my ex-husband's financial situation before throwing me out, then his accusation of infidelity hadn't been an emotional outburst. It had been a strategy. And the question that followed that thought was deeply uncomfortable. Why would a man invent a reason to throw out a pregnant wife? The answer was clarifying. Because he wanted her gone before something happened that would entitle her to something he wanted for himself. He had made one critical mistake. He had moved too fast and too clumsily. A man who plans carefully doesn't scream accusations across a kitchen island. He had panicked. And panic always leaves evidence behind. I left $2 on the diner table, pulled on my coat, and walked out into the cold Charlotte morning feeling something I hadn't expected. Steady. Not happy, not safe, but steady. In the way a building is steady when its foundations are properly set. I texted a family law attorney I knew from professional networking events. A woman named Claire Sutton. It was barely 7 in the morning. Her reply came 11 minutes later. She'd move her 9 o'clock. Come in at 8:45. Claire's office was in uptown Charlotte on the 14th floor. I was still wearing yesterday's clothes. I'd stopped at a CVS to buy a travel toothbrush and a clean undershirt, and that was the best I'd managed. Claire came in at exactly 8:45, set a yellow legal pad on the table, and looked at me with the level, unrattled expression of someone who had heard a great many terrible things in this room and had learned to meet them all with the same calm. "Tell me everything," she said. "Start from the beginning. Don't edit." I told her everything. When I finished, she set down her pen and folded her hands. The house was mortgaged in both names, which meant Ryan could not legally deny me entry. The joint account, she told me to check it right then. I logged in through the bank app and set the phone on the table. My hand was completely still, which surprised me. The balance was $43. 2 days ago it had held just over 29,000. 3 transfers. All made between 9:47 and 10:12 the previous night. About an hour after he'd put me out of the house. That's marital asset dissipation, Claire said, writing. It gives us grounds to move immediately for a restraining order on further transfers. If only Ryan had known, if only he had understood, that throwing me out that night was the single worst decision of his life. I called Daniel's family next. His sister, Michelle, who had always been kind to me during our marriage. I found her on social media, same face, just older. I sent her a message saying I was Daniel's ex-wife, and that I had reason to believe I might need to speak with someone about his estate. She called me back in 40 minutes. Her voice was quiet. Megan. She still called me Megan, my old nickname she'd never dropped. Daniel passed away in September. Stroke. He was 46. A pause. His attorneys have been trying to reach you. How did you not know? I told her my situation had changed recently. She was silent for a moment. He never remarried, she said softly. He talked about you sometimes near the end. Said you were the one person who never wanted anything from him. Another pause. His estate attorney is a man named Robert Kane. He's in Seattle. Sarah, you should call him today. I sat in that parking garage for a long moment after the call ended. Daniel was gone. He'd been gone for 5 months and his attorneys had been looking for me. Everything rearranged itself in that moment. The cash withdrawals. The questions about Daniel. The accusation on Tuesday night. The money moved out of the account within 1 hour of my leaving. Ryan hadn't suspected anything. Ryan had known. He had found out about Daniel's death months ago. A news item, a mutual contact, a search he'd run on his own. And he had spent those months calculating. When I came home with a pregnancy announcement that threatened to complicate his timeline, he moved. That was the point of no return. I called Robert Kane's office in Seattle. His assistant put me on hold for 4 minutes. When he picked up, his voice was careful and professional and, underneath all of it, relieved. Miss Mitchell, he said, I'm very glad you called. There's a matter of considerable importance regarding the estate of Daniel Cruz. You are a named beneficiary. I steadied myself. How considerable? $77 million, he said. But there is one condition attached. $77 million. I sat with those words in that parking garage, staring at the number painted on the concrete wall in front of me. Level 3. Robert explained the condition carefully. Daniel had structured his estate through a revocable trust. The condition for my inheritance was a formality, not a barrier. I needed to appear in person at his Portland offices within 60 days to sign beneficiary verification documents and complete identity confirmation. Daniel had built the condition in specifically to prevent opportunistic claims. He had wanted me to show up in person because he trusted that I would, and that anyone pretending to be me wouldn't bother. He updated the trust 8 months before he died, Robert said. You were always in it from the original drafting, but the revision increased the amount substantially following the final disbursements from the acquisition. I asked whether the trust could have been discovered by someone with resources and motivation who was specifically looking. A slight pause. The existence of a trust can sometimes be inferred through business filings. Someone looking carefully enough could potentially have learned about it through indirect means. There's a reason I'm asking, I said, and I told him about Ryan, about the timing, about the money moved out of the joint account the night I was thrown out. Robert was quiet through all of it. When I finished, he said very calmly, Ms. Mitchell, I would strongly advise you to ensure that any inheritance you receive is classified as separate property and placed in an account your husband has absolutely no legal access to. 4 days later, I flew to Seattle. Claire had already secured the restraining order on the joint account, granted within 48 hours. She had also sent a formal letter to Ryan's attorney establishing my right of access to the marital home to retrieve my personal property. A sheriff's deputy accompanied me when I went back. Ryan was home. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched me collect my things with an expression I hadn't seen before on his face. Not anger. Not contempt. The specific, calculating blankness of a man doing arithmetic. His mother, Barbara, was there too, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded and her eyes tracking every item I carried out. Barbara was 69 years old, small-framed, with silver hair and the warm grandmotherly manner of someone who used warmth the way a fisherman uses bait. She had never liked me. I had known that from the very first Christmas, but she had never shown it directly. She showed it in small calibrations, the way she asked about my career with just slightly too much surprise. The way she always deferred to Ryan's versions of their shared stories. She was, I had long understood, the engine behind much of Ryan's thinking. As I carried out my last box, she spoke for the first time. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," she said pleasantly, as if offering advice about a pie recipe. I picked up the box and didn't answer. I signed the documents in Seattle on a Thursday. The funds would be released in stages. An initial disbursement of approximately $8 million within 30 days, with the balance to follow over 18 months. Then the threats started. A phone call from an unknown number. A man's voice, measured, slightly too casual. He told me that people who do what I was doing sometimes find that things get complicated for them professionally. That I was an engineer with a license to maintain. That licenses can be challenged. I looked at my phone and said 4 words. "I'm recording this call." The line went dead. I called Claire. Then I called Robert. A threat against a professional license made by phone at the direction of an opposing party in active litigation was serious legal exposure for Ryan. Claire filed a harassment motion by Monday afternoon. By Tuesday, Ryan's attorney was calling Claire asking to discuss a more constructive approach. Claire called me afterward and I could hear the suppressed satisfaction in her voice. "They didn't expect you to have legal representation already in place," she said. "They expected you to be scrambling." Then came the settlement offer. Ryan would agree not to contest the divorce, waive claims against the joint account freeze, and, the letter used the word generously, agree to forego any challenge to my separate property designation of the inheritance. In exchange, I would drop the harassment motion, accept a reduced share of marital assets, and sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing me from discussing the circumstances of our separation with anyone. I read it twice, then called Claire. "He's trying to buy your silence," she said immediately. "The NDA is the tell. He doesn't care about the money split. He cares about what you know and what you might say." Then I called Michelle, Daniel's sister, and asked her one careful question. Had anyone contacted her or anyone in the family in the months following Daniel's death, asking questions about his estate? She was quiet for a moment. "A woman called," she said finally, "about 2 months after Daniel died. Said she was a journalist writing about tech acquisitions. She asked whether Daniel had left any significant bequests." A pause. "She had a Charlotte area code. That was enough. We declined the offer. No counter-proposal. No negotiated middle. A full accounting." The deposition happened on a Tuesday in March. Ryan sat across from me for the first time since that night in the kitchen. He wore a gray suit and had the composed, carefully rehearsed expression of a man who had been coached extensively on how to appear. He answered in measured cadences, using the phrase, "I don't recall," with practice frequency. Then Claire got to the email. She had found it during discovery. An email sent from Ryan's personal account to his attorney, written in plain language, stating that he needed the situation resolved before the Portland attorneys make contact with S. The email was dated the Thursday before he threw me out on Tuesday. He had known for days. Claire printed it at full size on a single sheet and slid it across the table without a word. The way a card player lays down a hand they've been holding all night. Ryan looked at it. Something shifted in his posture, barely perceptible, but I had spent 6 years learning to read that body. Claire asked him whether he had been aware, prior to that Tuesday evening, that his wife was a named beneficiary in Daniel Cruz's estate. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted. He declined to answer. Claire noted for the record that the refusal had been logged. Ryan looked at his attorney. Something happened between them in that glance. A conversation made entirely of eyes. And I watched Ryan understand in real time that the architecture he had built so carefully over months had failed. Not dramatically. It settled. The way a structure settles when a load-bearing element gives way. Slowly, then all at once. He looked at me. I held his gaze and said nothing. He looked away first. In the elevator going down, Claire said, He'll settle before this goes to the judge. I know, I said. Ryan settled 11 days after the deposition. He had no real choice. The settlement was 23 pages. He relinquished all claims to Daniel's estate in perpetuity. He paid back the full $29,000 plus interest. I received 60% of the marital assets, the house, the investment accounts, the equity in his business holdings. The NDA was gone. I signed nothing that silenced me. And there was one more page in that settlement. The one I had insisted on. Paternity established by prenatal DNA test at 12 weeks. Ryan was the biological father. That result was included in the settlement record. Proof in black and white that he had been wrong from the very beginning. I hope he read that page carefully. I hope he read it more than once. The first disbursement from Daniel's estate arrived on a Wednesday morning in April. I was in my best friend Cassie's kitchen. She had given me her spare room without a single question asked. When the notification appeared on my phone, I stared at the number and sat very still. I called Michelle and told her everything was resolved. She was quiet for a moment. Daniel would have been glad, she said. He really would have. Ryan signed the final divorce documents on a Thursday. He didn't look at me. Driving home through Charlotte traffic that evening, my daughter moved inside me for the first time. A small definitive flutter, like a hand knocking gently on a door from the inside saying, "I'm here." I know, I said back. "So am I." Her name is Lily. Born on a Tuesday in July, 7 pounds 2 ounces, with her father's dark eyes, and everyone agrees my stubbornness. She is 8 months old as I write this, making very serious observations about her own feet from a bouncer to my left. We live in a house I bought in a quiet part of town, better light than the old place, with a garden I'm slowly learning to tend. My engineering practice has 7 clients now. My name is on the door. That means something I find difficult to fully put into words. Barbara, Ryan's mother, I have not spoken to since she left Cassie's apartment with her homemade cookies and her carefully delivered threat. I don't expect that to change. Ryan exercises his parental visitation schedule. He is Lily's father. Whatever he did to me, that remains true. And I try, imperfectly on the days I'm still angry, to keep those two things separate. Sometimes I sit on my back porch in the mornings and think about the sequence that brought me here. A Tuesday night in February. A parking lot. A diner booth. A conference room on the 14th floor. It didn't feel like a story with an arc while it was happening. It felt like standing in a building coming down, and desperately searching for the walls that would hold. The walls held. When Lily is old enough, I will tell her all of it. Not as a warning. As a demonstration. See, I'll say. See what holds. If this story taught me anything, it's this. The people who try to diminish you are always counting on one thing, that you don't know your own worth. Ryan counted on my fear. Barbara counted on my isolation. They were both wrong. Know your value. Document everything. Find your Cassie, the friend who hands you a spare key before you even finish the sentence. And never, not for any amount of money, not for any promise of peace, sign away your voice. What would you have done, sitting alone in that car in February with $400 and nowhere to go? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. There are more stories coming, and you don't want to miss what's next. Thank you for being here.